moral argument for God's existence can be stated as follows. 1. Right and wrong exists only if God exists. 2. Right and wrong exists. 3. Therefore God exists. Clearly, if 1 and 2 are true, then 3 must be true. That is called logical validity. So if reasons can be brought in that demonstrate both 1 and 2 are true, then 3 must be true. So if you claim that God does not exist, then we must ask whether you disagree with 1 or 2 or both. In response to this argument for God's existence, I find most young people argue that morality is subjective. They claim that human societies simply create rules of good and evil. This creative act by humans is the sole reason for why ideas of good and evil exist. So is morality objective or subjective? To illustrate the difference, let's borrow from Socrates. Do we think that murder is wrong because human societies say so, or do human societies say so because it's wrong? Let's repeat that. Do we think that murder is wrong because human societies say so, or do human societies say so because it's wrong? If you say that humans think murder is wrong because human societies say so, then that is subjective morality. But there are major flaws with the idea of subjective morality. First, if man makes the rules of right and wrong, then which man makes them? Various people from various cultures have radically different ideas on what is right and what is wrong. For example, in ancient Rome, the law required that deformed children must be killed at birth. Furthermore, fathers had the right to expose any child deemed unhealthy at birth by leaving it on the doorstep. If anyone wanted the exposed child, then it could be picked up. Many infants died this way. But in our modern world, we believe very differently. Anyone who obeys the Roman law of killing a deformed child will be prosecuted and punished. We celebrate the care, nurture, and attention given to deformed children. For example, Helen Keller was born both blind and deaf. Under Roman law, she must be killed at birth. But we celebrate the efforts that were taken to teach her to speak via sign language. We celebrate Helen Keller's later accomplishments of both writing books and delivering lectures by sign language. So if human societies create the rules of good and evil, then which society is right? Is it the Romans or is it the modern world? Or, for another classic example, consider World War II. The Nazis were racists who blamed society's problems on Jews. They rounded up all they could find to exterminate them by the literal millions. Martin Luther King dreamed of a world where people were judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. But the Nazis considered a person worthy of death simply for being born a Jew. The Allies, on the other hand, found the actions of the Nazis to be evil. They waged the biggest war the world has ever seen to stop the Nazis. They literally fought as hard as they possibly could, as nations, to stop them. The Allied invasion of Normandy is the largest invasion of all time. They sacrificed their sons' lives and invested all they could in the war effort. So if human societies create morality, then which society creates it? Imagine that if the Nazis had succeeded in either brainwashing or exterminating anyone who disagrees with them, would that mean that suddenly the racism of the Nazis is the right thing to do? Amazingly, some people argue just that. They argue that there are no such things as moral facts, only moral fantasies. The idea of good and evil is just a human creation. So the present notion that the Nazi way is wrong and our way is right is merely a byproduct of the fact that the Allies defeated the Nazis. So if you believe that we think murder is wrong just because human society says so, then what do you say when there are multiple societies that disagree? But if you believe in subjective morality, then you believe that the society which is able to force others to agree is not factually correct in its views. Rather, it has simply eliminated any opposing voices. But the follow-up question is fairly simple. In the future, when you face a question of what to do, what choice will you make? You could, at this very moment, decide that the Nazis were right and join neo-Nazi groups. You could begin to try and continue the old war against the Allies with a new outcome where the Nazis are finally victorious. Would that be objectively and factually evil to do? Or would it simply be your opinion or preference? The further problem is how you will come to a conclusion on what you prefer. What will you choose, and why will you choose it when you believe that no choice is any better or worse than any other choice? If you can simply create the idea that a choice is good, no matter what choice you make, then you could literally do anything and believe that it's the best possible thing to do. You could spend all your time watching grass grow, never bathing, sleeping, or eating until you die. As long as you subjectively decide that this is the good thing to do, then you are living the best possible life. Furthermore, you cannot condemn the actions of others. If anyone does anything which you don't like, then why do you disagree with that person? The idea that such a person is wrong is merely a fantasy in your head. For example, if someone robs you, then is the idea that they were wrong to do so just a fantasy put in your head by society? Or is it wrong regardless of what any human ever dreams up about it? Or, when the Manson family murderers broke into a home and cut a baby out of a woman's womb and murdered it, all in an attempt to frame black supremacists and incite a race war, then do you have no problem with this action? Do you consider this action no worse than if they had simply bought the woman a fresh cake that they had, gotten at a store? If you believe in subjective morality, then you believe that the idea that the Manson family murderers are evil is simply a fantasy in your head. If you try to have them arrested and prosecuted for being evil, then you might as well be arresting them for a pure mythical fantasy. It's no different than if they had stolen gold from the safe under Bigfoot's house with Harry Potter's help. Your notion that the Manson family murderers are evil is a completely made-up fantasy that exists purely in your head, just like Bigfoot and Harry Potter. Amazingly, there are those who insist that the notion of good and evil is really a made-up fantasy in the minds of humans. They continue to insist that there are no moral facts, only moral fantasies. So if you believe in subjective morality, then you believe that all humans everywhere make all their decisions on the basis of pure delusional fantasies. As soon as anyone makes a choice, that person is believing that it was better to make that choice than to make a different choice. At the very least, that person is taking his or her best guess. But subjective morality is the idea that any notion of good and bad is totally subjective and just a made-up delusion. Thus, the idea of anything being better or worse than anything else is the delusion. It is a figment of the imagination. If you really believe that all humans are like this, then why do you ever try to reason with anyone? Humans would be the most unreasonable and irrational beings that can possibly exist, since every single choice is fundamentally based on imaginary things which do not exist. And furthermore, why reason with someone at all if people are unreasonable then that is no better or worse than if they are reasonable. The entire notion that anything is ever good or bad is a pure fantasy. It is not bad to be unreasonable. It is not good to be reasonable. Subjective morality is the idea that nothing anyone ever does is good or bad in any way. It is the idea that all notions of anything being better or worse than anything else is a totally delusional, insane, lunatic fantasy. It is no different from believing that you have a secret magical ability to turn into a penguin. It has no connections to reality and is something you just made up. Therefore, anyone who ever decides he or she likes something is just plain crazy, since that something isn't objectively better or worse than anything else. That person just made up that idea for absolutely no reason at all. He or she could base the liking of that thing or his or her predetermined preferences. He or she could base the liking of that thing on his or her predetermined preferences. But that just begs why he or she created these preferences. These preferences are just general ideas that something is better than something else and would be general fantasies to live by instead of making them up all of the time. Therefore, pretty much all people everywhere would be insane and in need of immediate medical attention. Of course, the idea that anyone actually needs anything would be a fantasy as well. Anytime we claim to need something, it's just because we believe that it would be better than not having it. Therefore, even curing people of this fantasy of belief in good and bad would itself not be good or bad. All actions would be utterly pointless, since taking the opposite action would in no way be better or worse than the action you did take. Furthermore, most who defend subjective morality are not this honest to their beliefs. They often argue that they tolerate all differences of views and opinions. They strive hard to never be intolerant of anyone's view, since not everyone agrees with them. They end up accidentally preaching tolerance as an ultimate moral fact, and thus they contradict themselves. But it gets worse. Are you tolerant of intolerant people, or do you allow their intolerance to go on unstopped? If there are people whose intolerance drives them to oppress others, will you stop them? If you do that, then you are intolerant of intolerance. It is logically impossible to be tolerant of all views because some insist that you ought to join them in being intolerant. By refusing to agree with these people, you are being intolerant of their demands on you. And why do you have a problem with anything in the first place, since you don't think that anything is actually wrong anyway? Not factually. This problem props up with other terminology. For example, are you opposed to closed-mindedness? Do you insist that you are open-minded to everything? If that's the case, then are you open-minded towards being closed-minded, or are you closed-minded to the very thought of being closed-minded? Now, hold on to your seats. In light of all this, there are people who still insist that morality is a human created fantasy and that there are no moral facts. They usually point us to situations where it is difficult to say what the morally correct thing to do is. Then they proclaim that we have no knowledge of moral facts since we are not sure what to do in some special situation. For example, should the government of France continue to ban Scientology? This religious cult promises total emotional wellness, perfect logical thinking, and perfect memory if you only pay them thousands of dollars for their therapy that they want to sell you. This is obviously a scam, and the French government protects its people by keeping this group out of the country. But in America, we believe that you can set up any group for any idea and promote it no matter how stupid it is. Welcome to America. Let freedom ring. People are divided over a moral issue like this even today. The French complain that it is the U.S. government's fault that Scientology got so big in the first place. Do you allow this group that destroys lives into your nation? Or do you protect the people from this silly little cult? Do we value freedom or safety? Here's another example. To the Christian, abortion is the murder of an infant child. To the atheist, humans have no souls, and the embryo is just a collection of cells with no brain activity or even the ability to feel anything. So put yourself in the place of former President Barack Obama. He claimed that his Christian beliefs led him to decide that abortion is the murder of babies. But he did not want to force his religious beliefs on the population. So does he uphold the right to religious freedom for atheists? Or does he uphold the right to life for people who he believes are babies? The defenders of subjective morality tend to point to situations like these, two examples that we just mentioned, where we aren't always sure what to do. But to help us make sense of all of this, let's just take a look at our options. Option 1. Humans know all moral facts with 100% certainty. Option 2. Humans know 0 moral facts, and any claim to the otherwise is a delusion. So it's easy to see the problem with option 1. How on earth can we claim to have 100% knowledge of what to do in all situations at all times? That would require us to have complete and total knowledge of all events, even theoretically possible events. That's obviously a ridiculous thing. If you know all of that, doesn't that make you God? Furthermore, wouldn't you have to be all-knowing to know that? So I ask you, are you all-knowing? I'm pretty sure there's some question that can be asked to you which will truly stump you. So obviously, option 1 cannot possibly be true. Option 2 is the idea that we have 0 knowledge of all moral facts, and that any claim to the contrary is a delusion. This is just as flawed as option 1, and cannot possibly be true either. Many ethical philosophers simply ask, why should we doubt our sense of moral facts? We all have this sense that some things are wrong. We sense that what the Nazis or the Manson family did was wrong. Why should we distrust this sense? If we choose to distrust it, then why not distrust all our senses? For example, if you see a car coming down the road, do you move out of the way? Or do you choose that your eyesight is an untrustworthy and delusional human sense? If you are unwilling to do this with a physical sense like eyesight, then on what basis do you do this with another sense like the moral sense? There's just no reason to insert out of nowhere this distrust for one sense and this total faith in the other. The classic question when it comes to subjective morality is this: do you believe that it is objectively wrong to take a 1-year-old girl and rape her while her mother and father watch helplessly? If morality is subjective, then any notions you carry that doing so is wrong is just a fantasy in your head. Are there moral facts or moral fantasies? Is it factually wrong to do that to a toddler? In some cultures, they throw battery acid in the faces of girls who break the rules by learning to read. Do you think that's just a difference of preference? Or is it objectively evil to do that? The famous defender of atheism, Sam Harris, says that if you see nothing that is objectively evil with those types of actions, then you are objectively evil and the victim of the worst possible blindness. But it gets worse for the idea that moral facts are just delusions. Imagine a man named Sam who has a very simple existence analyzed. If humans do not believe in moral facts, then humans cannot make choices. You simply cannot make a choice without believing that it is better than the alternative. If you say that the circumstances of the choice simply fit better with your preferences, then you still need to ask if your set of preferences are any better than another set of preferences. If we have no knowledge of good and bad, then your own set of preferences is no better than another set. So how did you come to this belief in your own little fantasy of your own little set of preferences of what is better and what is worse? The defender of subjective morality will of course tell us that you just chose your belief in an imaginary moral fantasy for no reason at all. But such an idea fails to see the fundamental nature of morality. You can't even choose to create a delusional moral system without also making a choice. You simply cannot possibly create the delusion yourself. Morality is too fundamental. It's too much a part of the intrinsic nature of what it means to make a choice. To quote the old proverb, a central problem with subjective morality is how does it subjectively get started by people who have no belief in anything being better or worse than anything else. I'm not saying that people can't create delusions about what is moral. I'm saying that they can't do it unless they want to. If humans live with the knowledge that nothing is better or worse than anything else, then why would they subjectively create the notions of better and worse? The belief that all actions are pointless results in inaction, doing nothing. Unless some outside force makes you do it, then it is impossible for you to do something without wanting to do it. So if all people know that nothing is better or worse than anything else, then they will do absolutely nothing at all. Subjective morality is the idea that people do things they have no desire to do. Their desire doesn't even pop into existence out of nothing, rather they create them, even though they neither desire to do so nor want to. If human desires did come from nothing, they would be illusions. But subjective morality says that they are delusions, created by people who do not want to create them. Humans can create delusions about morality. We do it all the time. It's called evil. But it's done to fulfill some other desire. It's done to get something we want. For example, we delude ourselves into thinking stealing is not wrong in order to steal something we want. But subjective morality is different. It's the idea that people create all notions of better and worse precisely not to get something they want. So while the human mind can create these delusions, how would a subjective world filled with fantasy morals ever get started by people who have no desire to start it? Option 1 and option 2 cannot possibly be correct. Option 1 is the idea that humans possess perfect knowledge of all moral facts. Option 2 is the idea that humans possess zero knowledge of any moral facts. But there is another option. Option 3 is the idea that humans possess some knowledge of moral facts, but not all. Since the other options are impossible, and these are the only logically possible options, these three, then option 3 must be true. Humans either know everything, nothing, or something. Then they cannot know everything and they cannot know nothing, therefore they must know something. And this logically necessary conclusion fits with our human experience. There are many situations in life where we have no idea what the right thing is to do. And there are many situations in life where we're absolutely certain what the right thing to do is. The fact of both of these experiences is only explained by option 3. Humans possess some knowledge of moral facts. Because of this, humans should be slow to pass judgment, but quick to act when the situation is clear. Furthermore, this allows the possibility of moral progress. Humans can actually try to learn more about what the moral facts are, and thus increase the pool of human knowledge of morality. And guess what? The whole of human history is filled with humanity's work on this subject. Various philosophies and religions have debated and sought after the truth of what is good. Today we call this the study of ethics. To the believer in subjective morality, the study of ethics is no different from the study of fairies or giant trolls. But it's odd that so much human effort would be dedicated to knowledge about things that do not exist. It's also more than just odd. It's logically impossible. Humans obviously cannot create fantasies. We can all dream up a million things right now, but by creating a morality itself, humans can obviously create fantasies. Can obviously create fantasies. We can all dream up a million things right now. But creating a morality itself as a fantasy is another thing altogether. We can be mistaken about what is the right thing to do, and we can blame ourselves for coming up with that fake idea. But creating all morality as a pure fantasy is illogically impossible as a starting point. In light of all this, I do want to point out everyone to the work of ethics itself. To peer into the mysteries of morality, ethical philosophers tend to use things called thought experiments. I encourage the listener to look some of these up. Furthermore, the role religion has played in this debate cannot be understated. The reason the Romans' view on babies differs from ours is largely dependent on the introduction of Christianity. The Christians upheld charity for all as a virtue. To do good for others who do nothing in return for you was to be truly like Christ. On the other hand, Nietzsche, German atheist philosopher of the 1800s, argued that this herd morality of Christians was something that really ruined the world and needed to be thrown in the garbage. So I exhort and encourage all believers in subjective morality to throw away the idea that morality is a big fantasy and instead enter the historical debate. Ongoing historical debate about what is truly good. After all, what better thing can one be